Hello, good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the MIT Club of Boston's seminar series. This is our final event for this year. We will be taking the summer off, so please watch our website for our announcements about the upcoming events in the fall. Before that, the club does have a couple of other events happening this month. We have, if there are any singles in the audience, on Friday, the 17th of May, there will be a mixer with alumni from MIT and the other Ivy schools. There's a special note here, singles of all ages are welcome to attend. Although it is at a bar, so I assume that's 21 plus. And that will be at Lear on Boylston Street. And also, right back here in the Broad Auditorium on Tuesday the 21st is the MIT Club of Boston's annual meeting. The speaker this year will be Deborah Bloom. She is the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Poison Squad, and is also the director of the Night Science Journalism program at MIT. So that'll be a very, very interesting speaker, and a chance to hear about everything that's going on with the MIT Club of Boston. Before I hand things over, I'd just like to introduce our speaker briefly. Nicholas Ashford is a professor of technology and policy, director of the Technology and Law program at MIT. And he is the founder of the MIT Technology and Policy program as well. He also holds a PhD in chemistry and a law degree from the University of Chicago. He also has a graduate education in economics. As visiting scientist at the Harvard School of Public Health, he's taught intensive courses in sustainable development, European and international environmental law at Cambridge University in the UK, and at the Cyprus University of Technology. He's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and his research interests include sustainability, trade and environment, regulatory law, and economics, as well as industrial policy, employment, and environmental justice. And if you've got a chance, he's co-author of a couple of important textbooks on the subject, one of which was available to take a look at our registration desk on technology, globalization, and sustainable development, transforming the industrial state. And in addition, he's the author of several hundred published articles in peer-reviewed journals and reviews. So with that, I'd like to invite Professor Ashford to take over.
Good evening. When I first suggested a title for this evening's remarks, I decided I wasn't going to use the title for the book because it was a title that would put even academics to sleep. So I thought that transforming the industrial state would grab more people. But Megan thought that wasn't grabby enough, so we've retitled it Sustainability at the Crossroads. Before I start, let me tell you that one of the great joys of being an academic is the fact that you have in your classes a small number of captured audiences for whom you can impose really bad jokes. So I'm going to follow that tradition by telling you the one about a Christian who had been kept away from the Colosseum until one of the lions that the emperor had starved was so famished that he was sure to finish the Christian off quickly. So the lion was there waiting, and the Christian was thrown in the center of the Colosseum. And the lion came up to him with his jaws and was about to eat him, and the Christian whispered something into the lion's ear. The lion sat down, crossed his paws, and did not eat the Christian. Now, in the Roman tradition, if the lion didn't eat you, you got your freedom. So before the emperor let him go, he said, look, I know you said something to the lion. What was it that you said? He said, well, I said if you eat me, you have to make the after-dinner speech. So you are captured, and you committed yourself to stay at least for a while. I will take, hopefully, the slightly less than an hour to give you these remarks. This book, which is a rewrite of a book that I wrote in 2011, is a 2018 version. It's probably the most important thing I've done in the 4+ decades I've been at MIT. The reason I had to rewrite it will become apparent, but it took a long time for the industrial state to feel the results of the financial meltdown of 2008. So by the time 2018 came about, which you might say is a good 10 years, the effects of the meltdown were still being felt, and we're still feeling them today. And so the book had to be basically rewritten, not just updated. I made it into a third, less pages, but twice of the intensity. And I think after 15 years of struggling with this topic, I think I finally have it right. It was for you to decide. Tonight I'm not going to say anything that some of you don't know better than I. So it is truly not what would be apparent in any particular discipline like economics and law and public participation. It is the connection between these things which unfortunately remain unconnected in the university, where we still have schools of science, schools of engineering, business, humanities, and the firms that still have themselves separated by marketing or human relations or industrial relations, and the government, which still has departments of economics, departments of labor, departments of EPA, if you want to call it a department. But it seems that the whole world is organized into silos, and that's the problem. That's why we have an enormous challenge in front of us to deal with what's wrong. And I will share with you my interpretation of what's wrong and why in these few minutes that remain. My co-author is Ralph Hall, who was the best graduate student I ever had. British educated, so he could read and write. And he's now a professor of urban studies at Virginia Tech, which in a way is a kind of spin-off from MIT. So let me start, and I'm going to borrow from a lot of different disciplines. Let me start by saying, well, how do we envision the industrial or industrializing state? And I'm going to borrow from economics, and is that showing or not? Doesn't seem to be showing, so I'm going to pick up a pointer, which hopefully will solve the problem of PowerPoint corrupting absolutely. So we have the supply side of the economy, we have the demand side of the economy, and the supply side of the economy has all the things you would imagine an industrial or industrializing nation to have. It has extraction industries, which take oil and metals and things out of the ground. It has manufacturing, which converts these things into products, agriculture, transportation, energy, which I'll come back to, the service industry, housing, and information and communication technology, and if you like, you can read artificial intelligence into that addition. Those are the things industrial countries do. And I'll come back to asking how they do that. But they produce products and services, and they are consumed by individuals, by other economic entities, and by the government. And the preoccupation, no, let me be less kind, the obsession of neoclassical economists is to make sure supply and demand is in sync. There neither be a shortage nor a surplus of products and services that people want. Now, together, when the economy functions, it creates products and services which are attended by sustainability challenges. And there are three sets of challenges. One is that not everybody has an adequate supply of the essential goods and services. They don't have enough food, or they don't have enough drugs and medicines, or they don't have sufficient housing. But certainly you couldn't call a nation sustainable if a sizable and growing portion of their population doesn't have the basic and essential goods. So that's one challenge, to make sure that people have enough of the necessary goods. And then there are the ones in green appropriately, which are the environmental problems. You can read them: toxic pollution, climate disruption, resource depletion, and problems with biodiversity. And if you were to count the minutes or the inches on a page of the print, you would think that the only problem is global climate change. Well, it's not. It's an important problem, essential, but there are other problems too, like potable water, and like the destruction of the ecosystem and the loss of species, which was on the news today. And the last one in green here, environmental justice, represents the fact that it is poor people and poor nations that bear the brunt of environmental challenges and catastrophes. And they are the last ones to receive political attention to make their situation better. So these five comprise what you would call environmental sustainability. And then in red is the fact that the way we operate in an economy is that we get people to work, we pay them wages, they spend their wages on consumption. And so employment has to be attended by sufficient purchasing power in order for the economy to work well. If there's not enough sufficient purchasing power, or what the economists call demand, then there are not enough people who want to buy the products or their services in the industrial state. And that leads to problems of disparity in wages. And there's economic inequity, which parallels environmental injustice. There's just a tremendous difference between what people can earn and people can spend and people can consume. And so those three sets of challenges represent the sustainability challenges, arguing that sustainable development rests on three pillars: the economy, the environment, and jobs and earning capacity. Now, you should never let anybody stand up in front of you and tell you about the problems unless they're also willing to tell you about solutions. How many speakers I've gone to that have really been very elegant about talking about problems, but then you say, what can we do about it? And they say, we don't have a clue. Well, you have to have a clue, right? Or else we're not doing our job. This is a revised slide. What's different about it? Well, the economist is concerned with things being in sync, what we call equilibrium. But supply and demand, in spite of what you thought, are actually not independent. There's producer-created demand. Kenneth Galbraith was quick to tell us producers are trying to persuade us to buy more stuff, bigger houses, SUVs, and so supply and demand is not really independent. So there's one failing of the system model. The second is that the financial system, and I'll have a lot to talk about that, unbalances the relationship by providing tremendous subsidies to the production end. We have oil subsidies, agricultural subsidies. You know all about these things. It basically makes the products cheaper and the services cheaper than they would otherwise be. And if that isn't enough of a distortion, the financial industry gives credit to both producers and cheap money to buyers so that more can be bought and more can be sold. And so if you say, well, how can you talk about a balance between supply and demand when the supply is so rigged and the demand is so rigged? Well, you boost up the supply, you boost up the demand, what finally happens? You get a bubble and things come crashing down. And that's what happened in 2008. That's also what happened during the Great Depression. By the way, we call it the Great Recession, right? They don't call it the Great Depression, I guess. And the name is only good one time. I've also put in red energy because energy, it turns out, is not just an industry. It is the source of economic growth that we've had during the several periods of the so-called Industrial Revolution. If you were to graph the absolute value to the economy from before 0 BC, it stays pretty flat until the Industrial Revolution, when everything goes up and is now, of course, coming down. The other thing that's different about this version of the overhead is that instead of just figuring out that you need money to transform the system, reforming the financial system is absolutely an imperative. As I will show, you can't make much headway in employment or the environment until you directly address the faults in the financial system. And it isn't just firms or banks that are too large to fail, it's firms and banks that are too large to jail. And so it turns out that there's some real shenanigans being played with here and in the Eurozone with the financial system, which I will come back to. Now, I said you should never let anybody off the stage without talking about solutions. So the solutions we talk about are these. First of all, if we were smarter and we had more specialization, we might have a smarter system. Industry who understands that it's been responsible for some of the problems that we've had argues that we're going to leave it to them to solve the problem. Government regulation was not on the list for a long time until we discovered the toxic assets. And then we asked the question, how come these toxic assets were floating in the financial system and they were rated not as triple Z bonds, which is what they should have been rated as, but the government rated them as AAA bonds and persuaded the European countries on the south, the so-called periphery countries, to exchange their perfectly good AA bonds for these bogus toxic assets which were called triple Z bonds. The American MBAs invented it, and the City of London in the UK marketed it to all the Southern European countries. By the way, they call the Southern European countries the periphery countries. Now, to me, periphery means there's nothing beyond. So I guess Africa doesn't count, Asia doesn't count, right? South America doesn't count, right? There's the periphery, but of course it's a misnomer because the rest of the world is extremely important as well. Now, in addition to the distortions that I talked about in terms of the previous two slides, if you looked at the factors of production, these are the things that are in the control, either actual or political control of the private sector. Natural and physical capital, energy, and labor, because we don't have much of a collective bargaining economy anymore, and information and communication technology. Now, all of those factors of production which are necessary to provide the state with products and services do not represent what the economist calls externalities. That is, there are effects on the environment, effects on human capital, which are not accounted in the price of the products. If, in addition to all the distortions that I talked about, on the supply side, if those factors, which are taken into account for decisions to make products and to offer services, don't carry the full price, then what kind of an equilibrium are you talking about? So the entire economic model, my friends, are built on a fiction. It's not just a question that markets aren't perfect. It's that the markets make no sense at all if you're talking about supply and demand being the ultimate goal to achieve. And in fact, the factors of production, they don't affect their full cost. And on top of that, things have become so volatile economically. The volatility of the economy has never been worse than it's been now. All you need to do is check your portfolio and see how it's been going up and down for the last 3-4 years, and you realize there's really something strange going on here. Now, what does volatility do? Well, volatility makes planning hard, but it does something else. Even if wages were continuing to fall to make labor an attractive factor of production, you wouldn't replace energy and physical capital with labor, because in highly volatile times, you can't put a small portion or even a large portion of labor aside while it does nothing. Whereas if you have 5 machines and the demand for 4 machines, you can put one of the machines in mothballs, you've already discounted the cost, and you're not really much worse off than you were. You just save that extra machine capacity for when the market comes back. But you can't do that with labor. You can't use a third less today and expect to have a third greater tomorrow, because people move and people don't stay in those jobs. Now, we are, and I haven't used the word up to now, in fact, we are in a perfect storm. And the perfect storm is brought on by the financial crisis. And this, to remind you what makes up the perfect storm, let me read for you. First, we're facing the longest recovery period of jobs or employment in modern history. Unemployment rates do not tell the whole story. Wages and job growth continues to fall. People are overjoyed with the jobs report when people report a low unemployment rate. But why is the unemployment rate low? Because wages have fallen and people have taken jobs at a fraction of the wage they used to receive, and that's the way the labor market adjusts. The wages go down and unemployment goes down. But that doesn't mean you're in a better off case. Many people stop looking for work. Many people are unemployed. Now I'll come back to talk about what's happened to the labor market, because it is a prime concern. We are facing unprecedented wealth and income inequality. In case you know the work of Piketty, who has documented how distorted the disparity of income has become, unprecedented. We are, in the words of Brynjolfsson and McAfee, 2 economists in Sloan School, we're hollowing out the middle class, and there's a distinction between the stock market, which really looks great, and the real economy in which people work. And from their book, The Second Machine Age, comes the prediction: we may not have the jobs that we thought we were going to have. In fact, if you talk to your portfolio manager when you're not angry at him, and you ask them, what kind of prognosis do you have for growth over the next 10 years? And the answer is 2 to 3%, not 6 to 9%, which is the historical time of better times. And there is, again, great volatility, as I've indicated, that we seem bent on believing in an economic recovery. The subtitle of the book is Transforming the Industrial State, not recovering the industrial state. We're not going to recover the industrial state. We shouldn't even try, really. We continue to believe that increasing technological innovation, MIT's middle name, R&D and innovation, it's going to solve all the problems, and with innovation is going to come basically a righting of the wrongs of the differences between supply and demand. Global climate change disruption remain essentially unaddressed. You know that. And reform of the financial system, if it isn't invisible to you, it certainly is illusory. And we have an unresponsive political system, and I don't think I'll find much pushback on that one. So this really says there's something really wrong, not only in Denmark, but in other places as well, right? So what is the nature of the current crisis? And I'll abbreviate it. It's the reinforcement of bad outcomes. First, there's a financial problem that is for a long time. Why was it caused? Because there was too much money in the economy. The standard multiplier about how much banks or lending institutions ought to lend beyond the assets they have. They have $10 million. A bank can lend historically $60 million. But during the financial crisis, 2008, what was the leverage of the amount of money circulating through credit? It wasn't a factor of 6, my friends, it was a factor of 1,000. It was a lot of money, and you know the printing presses were going marvelously, right? In case you wonder where the supply came from. So the finance has led to, unfortunately, hasn't hit everybody the same way. There's an increase in wealth concentration, which has a downward impact on employment because although the banks and the firms are awash with cash, they are not spending money like Henry Ford did or Andrew Carnegie on creating industries. They're buying back their own assets, which increase their wealth on paper. So we don't have an investment in R&D or innovation. Employment continues to go down. With employment going down, consumption goes down. If consumption goes down, investment and production goes down. You're not going to expand your market if there's nobody to buy it. And then at the end of the day, how much money do we have to pay attention to far off, although it's not so far off anymore, far off effects on the environment? So this perfect storm was a reinforcement of bad outcomes in every single factor that matters in an economy. And while we who sit here in this audience work for industry or work for the financial sector may not see these problems, they are plentiful in the rest of the economy. Well, the solutions, and I said you had to offer solutions. We offer a whole chapter in solutions. I'm not going to go into great detail, but let me just say that, no, I'm not going to, but you see that there are a whole lot of different actors that are involved. Everybody has a role: industry, government, education and human resource development, stakeholders who don't trust the government, or the private sector, and the international community. All have things that they can do to basically make a more sustainable production and consumption system, basically what we call the circular economy. Use less energy, use less material, and make much more effective industrial production. But that's only one of the sets of things. Then there is improving health, safety, and the environment, and the global climate impacts. And that requires serious effort to the environment. I won't belabor that point, but obviously regulation is key to making sure that environment, health, and the environment get dealt with. Why we are continuing to produce SUVs with no increased tax on these gas guzzlers is beyond me. I mean, we are not serious about global climate change. If every single new car that's being sold made in this country is an SUV, Detroit is basically relegated the small car market to China. Pretty soon we're going to have an influx of nothing but Chinese-made cars, and that is another kind of problem. Because it isn't just the domestic issues, it's and employment has to receive attention. I mean, you begin recently to hear about universal basic income, about government guaranteed jobs. There are a whole variety of suggestions, basically taken up by the Democratic candidates one at a time. We'll see whether they promise what they would hold. And then finally, at the end of the day, trade is intimately connected with industrial production. What we bring into this economy rather than produce makes a hell of a difference. And so promoting more sustainable industrial trade has to be one of those things of which there are many components, and I won't bore you with them here. If you're interested, you can look at them in great detail on lines that I collected. You're smarter than mine. But you have to embark on a deliberate strategy to decrease unsustainable growth, no matter how it is that you define sustainability. Now, at this point, I think you might say, who is this guy? He's standing up here, he's song of doom and gloom, and he just obviously doesn't know any history. So here's the history, right? We have had 4 different phases of industrial growth. And you can read them: the Great British Leap, the Victorian Boom, Belle Epoque, and finally the 4th one, which is the age of oil, chemicals, and automobiles. They've always been a period of bust followed by a period of boom, or boom and bust, depending upon your direction. But the jobs have always come back. And so, why worry? I mean, we've always had these 4 distinct periods of boom and bust, and it's going to happen again. And there's an economist, Venezuelan economist, I guess that's not much of a recommendation. Anyway, Carla Perez is a good economist, and she says the next industrial revolution is going to come from information and communication technology and artificial intelligence, providing we go green. Providing we go green. And there are other people who say actually going green isn't good enough. There are already too many people on the planet, too many cars, too many gas guzzlers and the like. We're here right now. We're just waiting, keep waiting for that boom, right? Hasn't come. The thing that differs this hypothesized next period of growth is the fact that all the previous 4 were based on a cheap and ready source of energy. ICT is not based on energy. It's not based on having steam or coal or nuclear or anything else. This is an article of faith. Do the expectation comport with reality? Well, now it's longer than usual that we wait for the next boom. And I think it's not correct. I don't think we're going to have it. And as I said, the smart money, if you ask your portfolio manager, is don't expect more than 2-3% growth, which is almost exactly the population growth, by the way. It's not much more than that. So there may be reasons not to believe that this period of great growth, 4 different stages, will continue, right? Now, I've left with you the idea that sustainable development is a good economy, a good environment, and work with sufficient purchasing power. And the thing that affects their relationship, as well as the direct effects, is both technological change, innovation, and globalization, otherwise expressed as trade. These are the things that move economies, and these are the things that are important. And you cannot plan to improve just the economy if you don't pay attention to labor and the environment. You can improve the environment if you're expecting to provide jobs for people. So it's the relationship between these 3 fundamental pillars of sustainability that has to be addressed. And the troublesome reality, and I'll show you graphs to indicate this. First, that job polarization in the middle class has hollowed out. It's already happened. There's a 3-decade declining labor share of total income from what was 50% of industrial profit to 33%. Increasing cost of living, growing income and wealth concentration, which I've already talked about, and the economy has substantial underutilized industrial capacity. If people had money to buy more, we would produce more. Now, that might have an effect on the environment we don't want to have, but we are not full throttle on the economy. And the problem is not the technological ability to produce more, it's to do so profitably, equitably, and sustainably. And I'm going to come back to show you the hockey sticks that are important. The solution, whether right or left, Europe or the United States, is less invest in technology. And my question is the optimism justified? Is that going to be the major issue? Now let me come back to some data, which will put data on the generalities that I get. First of all, here is from 1950 to 2018, private employment, median family income, private employment, GDP is going up, labor productivity is going up. Labor productivity is not labor productiveness. Labor productivity is a ratio. It's a ratio of the output of all factors of production, including technology and energy, divided only by labor. The reason productivity is going up is because labor has gone down. So you divide productivity, which is done better by machines and energy, by lesser workers, and the productivity goes down. Sounds great that we improve our labor productivity. It's not good for workers, but that's what your statistics show. Now this is pretty revealing. Here's your manufacturing output up until 2016. Here's your manufacturing employment. And it's not just the United States. If I take the US, Japan, and Sweden, you find exactly the same uncoupling between labor, employment, and output of the economy. Now, I'm going to ask something very, very simple. If labor doesn't have the money to buy the products of the industrial state, what is the point of have higher productivity? The point is that we are ending the period when it was always more jobs that would be created by employment. And by the way, from 1970 to 1990, the major loss of employment was technological displacement. From 1990 to this age, it's basically trade and the loss of jobs to cheaper producers like China. So two different causes of labor salaries going down in two different periods of time. But it's very significant. And here you find the different skilled workers, low skilled, middle skilled, and high skilled. The orange is the last period from 2007 to 2012. Look what's happened to the middle skilled workers. You basically have job polarization. It used to be that most people were on a Gaussian distribution of wages. And what's happened to that Gaussian distribution is separated. And you've got some very high and some very low. And the low is low. You have job polarization, and the conventional full-time job is disappearing. You can have a low unemployment rate if somebody's got a job which is not finite in time, but couldn't be called temporary, although it ends up being temporary. So the highest number ever of people who are not in permanent, long-time jobs now exists in this country and abroad as well. In the millennials, they're basically lost wealth. They are the ones who really have lost an enormous amount of internal wealth and ability. So this represents the changes in for various countries, right? It's a worldwide phenomenon that the middle share of workers is disappearing, and what you're left with is a bimodal distribution.
Okay.
This is the difference between profits, right, which are going up, and basically employment as a percentage of GDP going down. This is the great decoupling that Brynjolfsson and McAfee talk about.
Okay.
This is the difference between employee earnings and the cost of living, which employees have to pay, and this is a more distinct thing. This is inflation here. But housing, medical care, tuition, hospital, medical care, all much higher than the increase in wages. So the point is that the cost of living in what I call the real economy is really becoming much higher. The percentile have enjoyed, like the white population, the increase in wealth and income compared to black and Hispanic, it's a pretty grim picture. It's a pretty grim picture, right? So you've got here's your white population, your Hispanic population, black population, Hispanic population, over a period of 25 years, 30 years, and you see that the wealth distribution has changed dramatically. And if you look at this, right, you see that basically over a period of time, you have a lot of changes towards the concentrated wealth. Richest 1% bagged 82% of wealth created last year. 82% of the wealth went to the richest 1% of the global population. Stiglitz, who I think is one of our best economists, says that basically inequality and unearned income basically kills the economy, right? And if you look at two hockey sticks, this first one represents global warming, and you know you've seen that sign before, and the next one shows the increasing, the blue keeps increasing year after year after year, which shows that the concentration of wealth at the top is getting very, very high, okay? All right, let's ask the question, because innovation is important. What motivates innovation in the private sector, and who supplies the capital? First of all, there's this thing called technology push. If you've developed an invention and you're trying to find a market for it, about a third of all innovation historically is innovation looking for a market, getting people to buy a new gadget or a new capacity. Market pull, on the other hand, is by firms seeing an unmet need and willing to innovate. If there's a chemotherapeutic agent that doesn't have a good side effects, obviously the pharmaceutical industry is going to try to find one that has better performance. And government itself will fund research that is too risky for the private sector to fund. The answer to the question that is often asked, can government pick winners? It's a resounding no. But the evidence actually says otherwise. Aircraft and computers and chemotherapeutic agents basically have been funded by the government and then handed off to the private sector. So government funding of research has been a major determinant of economic growth. And of course, government can also make a market by purchasing. If the post office decided it wanted to buy electric vehicles, which were the most effective and efficient, it would draw into competition those people producing those electric vehicles. But the most pronounced change statistically of innovation is brought about by regulation. Regulation of health, safety, the environment, consumer products. It turns out that when government regulates stringently, stimulation occurs in the innovation area. So when you hear that government regulation kills innovation or that it kills jobs, it just isn't backed up by the statistics. Government regulation stimulates technology and causes new entrants to come in to replace the other ones. The book itself has 6 parts. Part of it deals with the history of sustainability. Part of it deals with economic development, industrial policy, regulation of health, safety, and the environment, regulation of trade, and then finally the chapter that ends up producing arguments for sustainability across the board. We have not had luck, you know, that Trump basically withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, ceding the Asian Economic Development Area entirely to China. The US and Europe cannot agree upon what's called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Why can't we have a trade agreement with the Europeans? The answer is because the Europeans don't want to reduce their regulation. The US has much less regulation than the Europeans, and the Europeans are not willing to give up the regulatory investment, not only in greenhouse gas reduction, but in toxic substances. So we are nowhere when it comes to international trade. I won't even comment on what he's doing with tariffs because it defies logic from anybody's perspective. So the policies that you want to have to reduce the impacts from trade agreements that give you the wrong thing is to use domestic policy to compensate negatively affected workers. If we're going to import products from abroad, you've got to do something about the dislocation of labor. You should also avoid pursuing trade agreements that protect the returns to capital owners, that is, people who have the natural capital, the physical capital, the energy, the ICT, while undercutting wages. If you undercut wages, you undercut demand. And reorienting international policy away from regressive trade agreements have to be done in the directions that benefit workers. Now I have in a moment something to say about that. And one is that if we decided, for example, to have a carbon tax, so we would finally begin to address the real costs of environmental pollution and greenhouse gas, we would have to put a tax on products which are imported from China, because China doesn't do anything about greenhouse gas reduction. So if they're going to outcompete us by what is called carbon leakage, the more we incorporate environmental protection, the more serious the trade threat becomes. And so it isn't Trump's tariffs, but it's the tariffs on environmentally unsound production. Now, someone may raise the issue of consumption. It is true that some of us consume too much. This is the largest group quintile that consumes. This is the lowest. People say, let's tax these people and let's give that money to the poor. But it turns out the poor spend a larger percentage of their disposable income on consumption. So if you just do nothing but take consumption power away from the rich, you're actually going to increase total consumption. So you have to decrease consumption across the board. Now this is a very interesting slide. Those of you may want to blame China because China's emissions, these are the emissions of various economic entities. The US, which is already going down because the economy is going down, not because we're doing something about greenhouse gases. But here we have Obama pledging 32% reduction. He makes it because the economy is not working. In the meanwhile, we continue to import things from China. China's up here. Now, you could say China's bad. Well, if we didn't buy Chinese refrigerators, China would not have those emissions associated on its leisure. How many more times does it take to produce and deliver a refrigerator from China to Pittsburgh than it costs to make the refrigerator in Pittsburgh? Anybody have any idea? How much more energy is used to have a hot point refrigerator made in China delivered in Pittsburgh? Well, my friends, it is 8 times the energy. 8 times the energy. Because China doesn't have good energy production, and it is not efficient as a producer. So why is it that we continue to import cars and car parts and appliances from China? It's because they do not include the environmental costs which make their products cheaper. So you have to equilibrate taxes at the border to make the system work. Now, I had produced something for, and I don't want to go on much longer, but I produced something for the European Commission in terms of some mythologies with regard to energy policy, and they're worth enumerating. First of all, myth number 1, it's possible to realize mutual gains in industrial competitiveness, reduction of greenhouse gases, and employment. Industrial competitiveness is measured by increased market share, increased product. You cannot benefit the private sector, have less greenhouse gases, and benefit employment. It is not possible, not the way things are arranged. You can improve the delivery of essential goods to people, but that's a different spin on economics. But if your interest is increasing GDP, it's not going to work. And it is argued that both Europe and the United States have an innovation deficit. That is, we need innovation in order to achieve greenhouse gas reduction. It's not true. We can achieve sufficient greenhouse gas reduction, not including nuclear, with the technologies which now exist. The problem is that the fossil fuel industry doesn't control them or the agenda. So we don't need innovation, we need deployment of technologies which have not been allowed to penetrate the market. It is argued that innovation fuels the industrial state and creates jobs. Actually, the last 20 years show you, or 40 years show, that innovation actually kills jobs. Creates some jobs, destroys more than it creates, and polarizes the workforce. Again, I dealt with this issue. Government can pick winners. It has shown historically that it can. That industrial policy is synonymous with innovation policy. Not true. If you want a strong, growth-oriented industry, it has to be a different kind of growth. Regulation does not inhibit innovation. It stimulates innovation. And this carbon leakage, that is, having more unenergetic, good energy products imported will not result unless you tax those items at the border. And trade in non-energy related goods is a win-win propositions. Not true. The only people who are guaranteed to win from export-import is the people who are in the business of export-import, not the countries. And then finally, nations can do it alone. We actually can't do it alone. We have to have international agreements with regard to how we're going to handle the carbon tax, how we're going to handle people who import without using the right kinds of energy. Now, inequality that we've seen has grown and it's accelerated is a consequence of the way growth is taking place. Piketty showed that the major problem is that the return to the investment of capital is much greater than economic growth. And somebody is hoarding the profits. Stiglitz has already talked about the fact that not everybody shares equally from the benefits of prosperity. And the Euro Foundation in Europe, which is an EU foundation, has shown that unemployment has been the main driver of inequality since the Great Recession, since 2008. But it took a long time for this thing to manifest itself in the economies. There are a lot of ways to talk about growth in products, or growth in profits, or growth in trade, or growth in the disparity of consumption, or growth in unemployment. It depends what kind of growth you want. If you want growth to occur in the reduction in unemployment, it has to be a different kind of growth. Now, what can you do aside from the solutions that I already put up, that is, make the economy more circular, and try to get health and safety more regulated? There's some other things you can do, and they've been suggested. One is increase the minimum wage. I mean, certainly, some states and some cities have done that. Provide a guaranteed basic income, which I don't think is a good end point, but could serve a useful purpose now. Institute a negative income tax. Provide funds so that workers are not put immediately out of work if work is not there. Provide guaranteed government jobs, either short-term fixing of the potholes and the bridges or long-term investment. Many of the periphery countries are criticized because they say they've got too much government employment. You wouldn't have enough private sector employment. If your government didn't provide the jobs, there'd be a lot of people unemployed. What about those doing unpaid work, mostly women, such as child rearing and care of the elderly? And if men don't think it's work, let them stay home a month. Shorten the work week. And by the way, this is being tried now in New Zealand and Australia and parts of the UK. People can produce more in 4 days than they do in 5. And you can hire more workers if you employ people for 4 days. Now, if we want work and we don't want pollution, how come we're taxing work and we're not taxing pollution? I mean, this is a no-brainer, right? I mean, it makes no sense at all. Change the taxation of income and wealth. The former Chancellor of Germany, name escapes me in a minute, said there are 2 things you'd never want to see being made. One is sausage, and one is the law. But to that I would add the IRS code. Bismarck. Increase the participation of workers in employee stock ownership plans so that they own some of the plants that they work in. Let people invest in hospitals and schools rather than tobacco and chemicals, but you would have to change the way the bonds which are lent are taxed in the US code. Right now, investing in a hospital isn't nearly as good as investing in tobacco and alcohol. So a couple waiting to buy a house is not going to invest in a hospital, most of whose benefits do not accrue to them. And allow workers to become what bankers can do. Let them be able to loan some of their money with a multiplier, what's called binary economics. Too much detail to give you to try to persuade you that that's a useful thing. You could also do what MIT cannot do. It doesn't know how to design jobs back into production. We can design jobs out of production, but we don't have the skill to design work back into production. But if work was designed back into production, then there would be more demand. So what are the questions? And this is the last slide. Now you've heard some of the things I've said, accepted some, questioned others. You should be able to answer the question, what are the causes of unsustainable industrial systems? What would a sustainable future look like? I think you know what it wouldn't look like, and I think you know what it would look like. And what are the carrots and sticks you would have to put into place? Change the tax code, change the tax code, to make a sustainable economy function. So it's not something we don't understand. The problem is there's a missing question. This is the question. Who's standing in the way? There is a considerable number of people and institutions that are standing in the way of us becoming a fairer and more sustainable society. And if you feel like delving in greater detail, you can try to read what I've spent a good many years writing. But I think I got it right after all this time, but we'll see with the questions. So let me stop.
A few minutes for questions.
I've often heard that government regulation does stifle innovation. You mentioned a couple of times that that's not the case. Could you give a couple of examples of how that isn't the case?
Well, Monsanto used to produce PCBs for transformers and capacitors. It turns out to be bad for the environment. The entire Monsanto market was taken over by Dow Silicone. They replaced the fluid that Monsanto was making, and they basically ended up making a tremendous market out of it. So that's one example. Your continual investment in renewables is now at a point where nuclear becomes not competitive economically. And this came about because we had battery requirements in California for the zero emission vehicles. And so there's example after example, and I've done the work actually which shows this. I can give you the references directly of regulation not inhibiting innovation. It's not that there aren't some losers. The dominant market may lose, but new entrants come in to to displace the existing technology, almost without failure. Almost without failure. Are you persuaded? I can give you the data. And by the way, the Europeans have looked at the same thing.
Well, those of us with long memories, 50 years or so ago, Dennis Meadows and the Club of Rome were writing about the limits of growth.
Can you talk closer to the mic?
I'm saying that 50 years ago, Dennis Meadows and the Club of Rome were talking about the limits of growth using industrial dynamics model to prove that the world would run out of natural resources and food sometime maybe around now. Were they correct in their timing? Was all that was wrong?
Well, I said a number of things. First of all, they did say we were going to run out of resources. And there is the limits to the amount of fossil fuels that are in the ground. I mean, it's not generated anew. What they also said is that health and safety and environmental externalities would become very expensive to handle. So in the meanwhile, we discover more deposits of natural gas, and I think limits to growth is still basically valid, that the effects you have on the climate, effects that you have on the amount of potable water, has really reached a limit. So I think they were basically correct. When they redid their model, the system collapsed 20 years later using prices rather than physical quantities. Because it's not just a matter of physical quantities getting scarce, it's a question of the price becoming beyond reach. That's really the principle behind the limits of growth.
Actually, I have a question. We talking about increasing demand by increasing wages, and how talked about shortening the work week but keeping the wages the same. What about other issues? I'm thinking particularly of the gender wage gap. Do you feel that government programs and policy and regulation would be effective at closing that gap? And would that have a similar effect to increasing the minimum wage?
The way we treat investment in capital equipment and natural capital is different than we treat investment in work. We distort the factors of production such that at the end of the day, it's the wage that is decreased. And one of the reasons, well, two reasons the wage is decreased. Number one is the capitalists don't own the worker, right? Secondly, volatility in the economy wants the investment to be in a sure factor of production. There's no reason why the tax code and the tax treatment of investment cannot be treated in a different way. Let me tell you a story about British Columbia. British Columbia wanted to put a carbon tax on fossil fuels. And it rolled out its first version. Its first version is they would collect the tax and they would invest it in environmentally better technology. And the people in British Columbia didn't accept that. But the second version was, we're going to use the fuel tax to decrease your income tax. So if you don't want your income tax to stay where it is, then you go ahead and vote against the carbon tax. But if you vote for the carbon tax, we're going to make sure that it comes back to you in reduced income tax. And the British Columbians bought it. That's why they have a carbon tax and we don't. So there's a clever way to do things, revenue neutral or revenue enhancing. And we do it all the wrong way, partly because of accident, partly because the system, people in the system have gained, they've learned how to game the system. If you buy a new piece of technology, you can, for environmental purposes, you can get what's called accelerated depreciation. You can write it off really fast. If you use workers to decrease the pollution, you can't do that. So you favor technology over labor through a whole variety of means, which could be changed.
I guess I'm wondering about the political climate, so I think it's pretty hopeless right now with this administration, but are there things you recommend that we do, or is there anybody in this current crop of potential candidates that you think has their eye on the ball a little better? What kind of advocacy should we be undertaking?
It's a good question. One thing we could stop doing is do things that are wrong. The tariffs that, well, I'm for tariffs to equalize environmental burden. The tariffs that Trump has put on make absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's all basically geopolitical considerations and who we can force to do what. So that's wrong. Secondly, the tax benefit that he last passed benefited the rich, it didn't benefit the things that almost all of the 22 or 23, what it is now, Democratic candidates have been singing. All of them have suggested one or more things which are sensible. Should we have money for infrastructure to fix the potholes and paint the bridges? Well, the infrastructure is falling down. We should do that because of that alone, but it will create temporary bolsters in purchasing power. It will jumpstart the economy, not as a permanent fixture. If you want it permanent, you've got to have a greater share in the industrial product between the people who own the capital and own the labor. Otherwise, you're basically going to have a large number of people who are employed at a very low level. And right now, the American family works more hours to maintain its budget than at any other time historically.